Welcome to Roots Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Roots Ruminants, and this one's coming to you from Kansas City. We're at the National Seed Trade Association meeting down here in Kansas City, and so we're sitting down with Jared and Stephen from New Zealand. So we've only had a handful of international guests. I think maybe you're the third. So it's a pleasure to get you on. So
you won the award for traveling the farthest for the podcast.
For sure.
Yes, it's a long way from New Zealand to Kansas City.
Right.
Yes, that's true. That is true. So Stephen, we've had just a tremendous amount of success with the products that have came out of your breeding program.
Yep.
And we've used a lot of the brassicas in your grazing system. So do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first, and then the company you work for, and how we've had a connection?
Yeah, certainly, Justin. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to your listeners. We've had a relationship with Melbourne via our distributor here in the US called IOCA. IOCA distribute the brand of seeds under PGG Seeds brand. And a bit of history is that Pine Guinness, PGG, and Wrightson's were two separate companies. They merged about 15 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer. And IOCA were a distributor for the PGG Seeds channel, so we just continued that relationship with them. They continue to sell our products under Brassica. Winfred's one of the products that we license in and sell via them. Some green globe turnips and various things like that. So that's the distribution model we have, and that's how the products get through to you guys.
Sure.
My role is to manage the international sales for our proprietary seeds, so those seeds that we own, and the brassicas are a really big part of it. And IOCA through to Melbourne are really important customers of ours. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
I got to be honest, 12 years ago, I remember picking up the pamphlet of PGG and looking at all these fat little white-faced sheep grazing fields of turnips. I was like, whoa, what is this? This is pretty cool. And then trying to figure out, okay, how do we put some of these brassicas into these grazing systems in the United States?
Yeah.
Knowing that our farmland isn't being used for grazing sheep at all, but there was starting to be this cover crop movement, double cropping systems in after grain harvest.
Yeah. And
we started to find a bit of a home for them.
Yeah, well, and that's the beauty about the brassicas, because the brassicas are quite versatile plants. And you've got brassicas that can be used for winter forage or fall forage or summer forage. And they can be grazed by sheep, cattle, and deer.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of versatility. And there's a lot of different brassicas for different uses. So, yeah, we've got a really wide portfolio and can offer a lot of stuff.
So what was the original brassica? Was it mustard that started with it? Or what was when it branched out? Do we know which of the brassicas, even the native ones, which were, the earliest?
Yeah,
or
brassicas have been used for hundreds of years, and I guess it depends a wee bit on which origin you look at.
Okay.
But mustard is one that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It was rutabaga, or Swedes as we call it. They've been around for a long time. There's turnips, and there's a range of things, but possibly right back in the origins, it could well be mustards.
Okay.
Our plant breeders would know that history, but I don't know that lineage. Yeah,
just curious. So it's anything in that cabbage, mustard type family, right? It's all that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely, but there's a really interesting difference because there's brassicas for vegetable or oilseed production as well. So two different uses there: vegetable seed, oilseed, and then there's forage brassicas. And it's a really important question, or a really important thing to try and distinguish between, in particular, here in the US, there's a lot of stuff that gets classified as a brassica or a forage, but it may actually be an oilseed rate or a radish that's suitable for oilseed production and not forage production. And that's a really, really important thing to make the distinction of. We're breeders of the forage plants, so all of our PGG seed stuff that's available through Melbourne is strictly forage plants. Mm-hmm. It's not the stuff that runs off to seed in 90 days and you squeeze the seed to get the oil out or anything like that, like some of the stuff that is available.
So the typical brassicas are deep taproot type, plants, correct? Lots of leafy forage in the forage side of it, right? So lots of green leafy material.
Yep.
Highly digestible.
Yes.
And also extremely cold tolerant.
Yeah. And so there are some some radishes and some turnips that don't have cold tolerance, but within those species there are also some that do have really good cold tolerance. And then the forage grapes, they have really good cold tolerance. Kales are very winter hardy and have good forage tolerance, cold tolerance, I should say. And Swedes are also very winter hardy. So there is some segregation within the species, and then there are true species that are winter cold tolerant.
Yeah. A lot of times you do a very mixed multi-species cover crop mix. As the temperatures get colder this time of year, right, in the northern plains, things start dying off one at a time, right? First your sorghums, your millets, the ones that are really sensitive, get 32 degrees and they start to boom, go brown. And then you're usually left with the time of the year where there's some clumps of brassicas, right, that are still grass green out there while everything else is dying down.
Yeah. And typically they'll be your winter hardy turnips and your forage grapes that have got winter hardiness as well, probably. Maybe some kale, I'm not sure when you use that, but those are the things that you would pinpoint and say, yep, those are the winter hardy ones, yeah. And you find that there are, within turnips, there are definitely summer types which the bulbs don't have the keeping ability. They turn to mush as those temperatures drop and you start to get frost and the leaves burn and frost off. But so there is within turnips a summer type and a winter type. So it's really important to know which one you're getting or which one to match up for the purpose.
Do you do much at all on doing different brassicas or different grazing mixes that contain brassicas for different species of livestock? Certainly you're doing some sheep grazing mixes, but what about dairy or fattening out yearling steers or anything like that?
Yeah, there is some varieties or again species that suit different classes of livestock better. And it also comes down to, and this is a really important point for us, is when you need the forage, and that comes down to the farm system a little bit, or the climatic conditions, regional adaptation, things like that. So, for instance, we use summer turnips on dairy farms in New Zealand to maintain milk production through the summer months when the grass is not growing. So we've got a feed deficit in the summer because the lower rainfall, the higher temperatures, the ryegrass starts to slow down in its growth. So our farmers would plant turnips, the summer turnip, and that's really quick growing, and in 90 days they'll be growing a crop that might have 10 or 12 tonnes of dry matter on it, and they're allocating a certain amount, a third of the cow's diet a day to the animal, and they'll be strip grazing it and consuming that for the summer. And then in the winter, those same cows might be on a diet of kale and Swedes, or kale and Swedes and maybe a little bit of ryegrass, or hay or silage, those sorts of things. So we have different crops for different regions and also different farm systems and different times of year.
Have you gotten into Swedes much? Have you done much of Swedes, Justin?
We haven't done much of Swedes.
Yeah. The thing with Swedes is they're a really long-term crop. They're on the ground for probably around about 9 months, 10 months. They've got really high yield potential, incredibly high forage quality because the bulb's massive and it has really good sugars and energy content. But they're a little bit prone to heat in the summer, and they don't yield quite so well if it's a hot, dry summer. So, they probably haven't been used as widely as things like green globe turnips, for instance, which you can plant later and still get a similar result out of. So it sort of comes down a wee bit to the climatic conditions and the time you've got to grow that product.
So in New Zealand or Missouri or southern Missouri, we have this prolonged cool season, which doesn't really fully off frost kill, right? Might get down to 20 degrees, 21 degrees, but don't have a good killing frost. Yeah. It works really well because they have that long time frame. Yeah. Whereas in our shorter 60, 90, 120 days, starting in August, we wouldn't quite see the full potential out of that.
Absolutely correct. You wouldn't see the full potential. And so we in the North Island of New Zealand wouldn't use Swedes because the summer's too hot and they tend to wilt a wee bit and not get yield out of it. Reduces the yield potential. But you go to Southland and it's a bit like you're describing what Missouri. Cold through the winter months, a lot of rain through the summer months for us in Southland, and a really long growing season. We can get massive yields of Swedes down there. So potential is much higher. So again, we look at the regional adaptation, the farm system, all of those things when selecting which brassica to use.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned ryegrass quite a few times, and it's something that we probably don't fully utilize to its fullest. Right? Like we'll use it kind of as a nurse crop in perennial pasture mixes, knowing that it's only going to survive a couple of years, or we'll use Italian ryegrass for a 1-year annual crop, but we don't use a lot of other perennial ryegrasses in these grazing systems, especially. But why would somebody mix it with brassicas in those scenarios?
Yeah, well, typically we probably wouldn't use it mixed with it, but we would have a paddock alongside.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is because you can't feed 100% of the cow's diet or the sheep's diet on brassicas. So you've got to have something else to give them the fibre and to give them an alternative, energy source, etc. So you're limited by, we always say, you're limited by the percentage of the diet that you can feed the animal. So they've got to get something from somewhere else. So for our brassicas, we might be giving a third of the animal's diet a day on brassicas. That means that 70% effectively is coming from ryegrass or hay or silage as well. And so we complement them, we don't use them together. Ryegrass for us is a really easy plant to grow. Perennial ryegrass is really easy to establish. It's got good high productivity where we've got good summer rainfall or mild summer conditions. And it's a really forgiving plant under grazing, so it regrows really quickly. So for us, it works. The challenge for some of your regions will be the winter tolerance of the ryegrasses, and not all grasses are winter dormant and or have that cold hardiness that you require.
Sure.
So that's potentially one of the reasons why, but there might be better suited species to your environment for that. But ryegrass works for us.
Okay.
Because we're a small country surrounded by the sea, so very temperate climate.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of climate range from the top of the country to the bottom, but typically it's very temperate. They're not continental or like you have with your plains country.
Right.
How often would you refresh those ryegrass stands? It's a perennial, but it does kind of come in a rotation, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And we say the ideal is every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we suggest to farmers that they should have a 20% rotation. Mm-hmm. So then they're on a 5-year cycle. And brassicas are a really good fit to be in that rotation because it allows you to break up the soil, get rid of any of those old grass weeds, all of those sorts of things, and get the fertility level right before you go back to the new grass. But typically what happens is probably most farmers are on something more like a 10 to a 15% rotation. So they're probably working on 8 to 10 years in reality.
Okay.
But 5 years, what you tend to find is that the productivity of those ryegrasses is starting to slow down a wee bit and just go off the peak, mostly because of aggression of weeds and things like that. So 5 years would be ideal, but 7 to 8 years is probably what the reality is.
Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at New Zealand at a really high level and the United States at a really high level, what are some of the things that you think each country is doing better or worse than the other? Or do you think that New Zealand is way further ahead of the United States at this in agriculture or behind? Or compare and contrast, I guess, globally for the two countries?
Yeah. Look, I think it's really hard to say that we're better in this area and we're better in that because the climates are really different.
Sure. Yeah.
And what I find is when I come to the US, I find farmers that are doing a fantastic job in their climatic zone.
Okay.
And New Zealand farmers do a fantastic job in their climatic zone. You brought a New Zealand farmer and his system to the Midwest, it probably would fail. Because we have all of our animals outdoors, we're grazing grass all winter long, things like that. Yeah. And it may not necessarily work in an environment where you've got a lot of winter cold conditions. And so it's a wee bit hard to say we do something better in this area, something better, But I think if Oregon's a really interesting example because it's probably the closest thing there is to New Zealand, Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some really, really good pasture management in Oregon on perennial ryegrass systems like we have at home. And so the contrast between the two systems is actually pretty minimal. They're very, very similar. It's still employing the same grazing rotations, using the same species, perennial ryegrass, white clover, those sorts of things. In that region, and I think farmers are both, really well adapted, getting the best out of their pastures. Yeah. And then you come across here, and it's very, very different. And, as I say, it's probably not a fair comparison in New Zealand, but, the guys here really know how to manage the pastures too.
Sure.
And I think probably the one thing, though, is the rate of pasture renewal. And that's something that could perhaps be improved on here, but, in certain systems.
Yeah, I would say Northern Plains, Midwest, if we're planting grass for pasture, for grazing, it's hardly ever thought of as a short or moderate term. You know what I mean? Commitment. We don't really, and so a couple things is one is we usually plant for species that have more longevity, but it also I think puts us out of this opportunity to have these refreshing stands of cropland that goes into perennials for a period of time to help regenerate the soil, help do all the positive things that perennial can do, then come back into cropland. We have a very strict dichotomy of this is grasslands, right, and this is croplands, right, and we don't mix the two enough to the degree. Not saying we should go till a bunch of native sod to create more cropland, but we don't usually think of using perennial systems in our cropland rotations.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
But there's a lot of places that do, right? So certainly the South, there's places in the U.S. that do that, and then globally, it's even Europe as well, like far more common to have these pasture systems refreshed.
Yes. Yeah.
On a continual basis.
Yeah, and I think you've got to look at, if you are going into that system to renew pastures, you've got to look at the risks, and you've got to say, well, is this a soil that's prone to erosion? Or is this an area where we're going to get a lot of wind damage at that seedling stage and those sorts of things? So you've got to weigh up that risk. And the locals know that system best, and they know, and there'll be reasons for why they do and why they don't. But I think it all comes down to the risk and reward, really, when you start to enter into those programs of pasture renewal.
Choose, and usually there's something wrong with it, right?
Yep.
So, and you get to choose, am I going to graze that field? Am I just going to harvest it for cash value, sell the grain, whatever? Or am I going to rent it out?
Right. Okay. Sell silage, it could be storage or grain. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Okay, but I think we can do this with just brassica scenarios.
Okay. Brassica-only.
Brassica-only scenario. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
And so here's what I have in mind. Okay, so we got a field of Winifred brassica.
Yes.
Okay. We've got a field of dwarf Essex rapeseed.
Ooh. Yeah.
And we have a field of sterile mustard.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And you get to choose to graze one, harvest it for feed, or just rent it out because you don't want to deal with it.
Well, that's easy.
Okay.
It's easy for me.
Okay. Well, you get to go first.
I'd graze the Winifred.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why I'd graze the Winifred is when you look at it, and I've seen photos today of these crops that are metre high, beautiful big leaf area, and really healthy. And you just know that the animals are going to do well.
Yeah.
The quality is there, and you just know that the animals are going to get in there, and with the right management, you'll get really good animal performance, be it weight gain or be it body condition improvements, all of those sorts of things. So I'd always graze the Winifred. And the other thing is the Winifred's regrazable, so it will grow back.
Sure.
And so
multiple grazes.
Multiple grazes. So for me, it's a no-brainer. The Winifred's the grazing one.
Okay.
Okay. What
Purple top turnips.
Yeah. Well, purple top turnips is a good single graze option.
Okay.
Not the regrowth, but yeah. So I guess I've got a choice of either renting it or harvesting it. Yeah.
Sterile mustard.
I think I'd read that. If it were me, I don't know much about the species.
I'd harvest it with a bunch of bees and honey out of it. It's about the only way. It's the best way to do a single stand of that, right?
Yeah.
So
all you have is the flowering. There's not a lot of grazing value for the mustard.
No, it's a straight species. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an incorporation. It can be, but it's straight species. Not assuming, but it's a great pollen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great pollen.
Sure. That's a great
Early flower.
Yeah. So we can come in and harvest that.
How are you going to harvest the turnips, though? Or sorry, no. Then you just have to rent out the turnips.
Yeah, it's fine. But in terms of they're more common, right? People understand it. I always look at the rented scenario as like my cash opportunity, right? So I always like trying to use the obscure things, and then rent out the thing that would have the most value to the most neighbors, something that they're most familiar with.
Yeah.
That's how I usually approach it.
Yeah. If you said, hey, I got a quarter of turnips or I got a quarter of Winifred, you want to graze one? They're probably like, yeah, I'll graze the turnips. They know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then if you like at the bee thing, you could sell honey mustard, right? Just make like actual honey mustard.
That's where honey mustard
comes. And be like, all other honey mustard is imitation. This is actual honey mustard.
Have you had the honey mustard dots?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
they're really good.
Anybody that sells dots at a gas station or store, I hardly ever buy the pretzel farm because I'll buy 2 bags of the cheese rolls before I'll buy the pretzels. This is a local delicacy food around us.
Yeah, it's
anyway.
a gal in North Dakota started these dot pretzels.
Yep.
She sold them for $2 billion.
Yeah,
domestic.
$1 billion, something like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But they're a
Pretzel.
very uniquely flavored pretzel.
Right.
And now there's the honey mustard. There's like a Fiesta
Yeah.
Southwest
ranch
one or
one.
something. So.
There's a cinnamon sugar one. I like those.
Yes.
Those are good. It's a nice
Sounds
treat for
good.
breakfast with
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah.
And you just get a few, not have a full donut or anything.
Honey mustard. Honey mustard honey.
That's right.
I like it.
I mean, because I don't like mustard that much. I think I can't be the only family that like buys a new thing of mustard every 2 years and then waits for it to expire while it's still 2/3 full, throws it out, and then has to get a new thing of mustard. Because you're like, you have to have mustard, right? Because it's such a basic condiment, but it just does not get used in our household.
Exactly the same.
Like
Yeah.
we go through 37 bottles of ketchup for every one little thing of mustard.
Smart marketing. Minimum size 12 ounces.
You gotta have honey
Use
and
this.
mustard. Like mustard is totally cheating off of the ketchup marketing
Oh, yeah.
campaign.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just coming along for the ride.
they probably provide the yellow bottles next to the red bottles that you buy as a picnic set. They probably do that for free, like paying to get the yellow bottles just to get people to incorporate buying honey or mustard and ketchup together.
Yeah.
But the ketchup to mustard volume has got to be like 30 to 1, 20 to 1.
Yes.
You know,
There's not a lot of people dipping French fries in mustard.
No,
Wow.
obviously.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be
so
done
much. That's how I'd probably square out that scenario.
Yeah.
The pepper bucket
I like
chocolate
it.
sauce. Yeah.
Works.
I agree.
Well, it's a good ending to the
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
To talk about the condiments.
Yeah.
To a successful podcast on brassicas, we end with that.
Brassicas are a great condiment to any cover crop mix. Any multi-species grazing cover
There
crop
we go.
mix, they're a great
That's a
addition.
fact.
You gotta sprinkle a few in. That small seed stuff does not take too many pounds
No.
of brassicas to really
Well,
spice
that's the
up
other
the
thing. You're
things.
getting a lot of value for money.
Yeah.
Sugar in the bag of brassica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of energy in that bag.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
When you analyze it on how far it goes and how much we produce, there's a lot of energy in
Well, the biblical example of faith is the mustard seed, right?
Yep.
From a small mustard seed, so much will grow.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. That was awesome. to see you.
Yeah, well,
Been a pleasure.
it's great to be here. Thank you
Okay.
for having me.
Yeah.
Hosting me.
All right. Tune in next time for another episode of Roots and Ruminants. Thanks for listening.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Roots and Ruminants podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those social media things. And, if you ever have any questions, just give us a call. We've got a toll-free number here at 888-498-7333. Be glad to hear from you. Thank you.